Frederick Sterling believed the night of the Sterling Holdings annual charity gala was his coronation. He stood on the mezzanine of the Grand Astoria ballroom, a glass of champagne in his hand, surveying the glittering assembly of the city's elite. Every detail, from the ice sculptures bearing his company's crest to the string quartet playing softly in the corner, was a testament to his power. He was a king in his castle, and tonight he would be formally awarded the jewel for his crown, the Meridian Tower project, the most ambitious architectural undertaking in the city's history. He didn't know that the quiet, unassuming architect he had spent 3 years systematically humiliating was about to become the kingmaker. Down on the main floor, almost lost in the crowd, Arthur Vance felt the crisp, folded edge of a document in the inner pocket of his tuxedo. It wasn't the multi-billion-dollar construction contract Frederick was anticipating. It was a different contract entirely, a simple 4-page document signed 6 months prior, a contract that would cost Frederick Sterling everything. For those of you watching, have you ever been in a situation where someone completely underestimated you, where they judged the book by its cover and got the story completely wrong? Let us know down in the comments where you're tuning in from. We love to see how far these stories travel. Now, grab a seat, because you're going to want to see how this unfolds. The story of Arthur's silent war didn't begin in the glittering ballroom, but 3 years earlier, in the stifling quiet of the Sterling family's drawing room. The air in that room had been thick with the scent of old money and fresh disapproval. It was 2 weeks before Arthur and Clara's wedding, and they had been summoned for a frank discussion with her parents, Frederick and Beatrice. Arthur, then a promising senior architect at the prestigious firm of Hawthorne and Finch, sat with a posture of polite composure, his hands resting on his knees. Clara sat beside him, her fingers twisting the engagement ring he had given her, a simple, elegant piece he had designed himself, far from the ostentatious gems her family favored. Frederick Sterling, a man whose presence filled a room long before he spoke, leaned back in his leather armchair, steepling his fingers beneath his chin. His gaze was analytical, like a butcher assessing a side of beef. "Arthur," he began, the name itself sounding like a mild disappointment on his tongue. "Clara is our only daughter. Her happiness and her stability are our primary concerns." Beatrice, perched on the edge of a silk settee, added her voice, a high, reedy counterpoint to her husband's baritone. "We had always imagined she would marry someone established, someone from her own world." The implication was clear. Arthur, despite his respected position and solid income, was not from their world. He was the son of a university professor and a librarian, a man who had earned his place through merit, not inheritance. To the Sterlings, this was a liability, not a virtue. "I love Clara, and I am fully capable of providing for her," Arthur said, his voice even and calm. He did not feel the need to brandish his salary or his prospects. His work spoke for itself. He believed his character should too. Frederick let out a short, humorless laugh. "Capable? My dear boy, you earn a handsome salary, I'm sure. You pay your bills. Commendable. But you don't understand what it takes to maintain the life Clara is accustomed to. This isn't about paying for groceries. It's about legacy. It's about position." He gestured vaguely at the opulent room around them. "This doesn't just happen. It is built. It is maintained. It is protected." Clara finally spoke, her voice small. "Daddy, Arthur is a wonderful architect. He's brilliant." "He's an employee, Clara," Frederick corrected, his tone sharp. "He works for a name. He doesn't own the name. There is a fundamental difference." He then turned his focus back to Arthur, his eyes narrowing. "You understand, of course, that Clara's trust fund will remain under our management, for her protection." It was a warning shot, a clear declaration of the power they intended to wield over his marriage. Arthur looked at Clara. He saw the conflict in her eyes, the desperate plea for him to just agree, to be smooth, to get through it. For her, he nodded slowly. "I understand completely, Frederick. My only interest is Clara's happiness." Frederick Sterling saw this acquiescence not as a gesture of love for his daughter, but as a sign of weakness. It was his first and most critical miscalculation. He believed Arthur Vance could be managed, contained, and controlled. He had no concept of the quiet, unyielding strength that resided behind Arthur's calm demeanor. Arthur left the Sterling mansion that day with the distinct feeling that he had not just met his future in-laws, he had met his future adversaries. And he knew, with a certainty that chilled him, that this was only the beginning. The wedding was a beautiful, hollow affair, a production orchestrated by Beatrice to showcase the Sterling family's status, with Arthur feeling more like a prop than a groom. The first major confrontation, the one that truly set the tone for the years to come, happened almost a year later. It was a Sunday dinner at the Sterling estate, a weekly ritual of forced civility. Arthur had recently made a significant life change. After months of careful planning and saving, he had resigned from Hawthorne and Finch. The official story he gave the family was vague. He was exploring freelance opportunities and wanted to forge his own path. In their world, this translated to one word: unemployed. The dinner table was a minefield. Julian, Clara's younger brother, a smirking princeling who worked in a vaguely defined executive role at Sterling Holdings, was the first to strike. "So, Arthur," he said, swirling the wine in his glass with an air of mock sophistication, "how's the fun employment life treating you? Must be nice to have so much free time. Clara tells me you've been spending a lot of time in your little study." Arthur placed his fork down gently. "I've been working on some preliminary designs, developing a portfolio." This was the truth, but a radically abbreviated version of it. His little study was the temporary headquarters of Vance Design Group, the firm he had just incorporated. The preliminary designs were for 2 major residential contracts he had already quietly secured through contacts who valued his talent over the Hawthorne and Finch letterhead. Frederick scoffed from the head of the table. "Portfolio? Arthur, let's be blunt. You walked away from a 6-figure job at the best firm in the city. For what? To doodle in a notebook? Do you have any idea how that looks?" "It looks like he's following his passion, Daddy," Clara interjected, though her defense was weak, her voice trembling slightly. She hated confrontation, especially with her father. "Passion doesn't pay the mortgage on a 2-bedroom condo, Clara," Beatrice chimed in, dabbing her lips with a napkin. "It certainly doesn't pay for club memberships or summering in the Hamptons. We're just concerned, dear. Your husband has made a very impulsive decision. It affects you." The assault was coordinated, a 3-pronged attack. Arthur felt the familiar heat of anger rise in his chest, but he mastered it, converting it into a cold, observant calm. He looked at his wife. She wouldn't meet his gaze. Instead, she stared at her plate, her silence a painful concession to her family. This hurt more than any of their insults. Her failure to stand beside him, to present a united front, was a wound that cut deeper and would be slower to heal. "It's a calculated risk," Arthur said, his voice measured. He chose his words with the same precision he used to design a building's foundation. "I have a business plan and sufficient capital to see it through. It was not an impulsive decision." Frederick laughed, a booming, dismissive sound that echoed in the cavernous dining room. "Capital? My dear boy, your entire life savings is what I spend on property taxes for the guest house. Don't talk to me about capital." He leaned forward, his expression turning serious, almost predatory. "Let me give you some free advice. Go back to Hawthorne. Beg for your job back. Tell them you had a moment of youthful idiocy. A man with a family, with my daughter, doesn't get to have artistic flights of fancy. Your responsibility is to provide. Right now, you are failing at that fundamental duty." The accusation hung in the air, thick and poisonous. Failing. He had been called a failure, not because he was, but because he had dared to step outside the narrow confines of their definition of success. He wasn't just an architect anymore. He was a project they needed to manage, a flaw in their perfect family portrait. Arthur didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. He simply absorbed the attack, his mind cataloging every word, every sneer, every glance of condescension. He looked at Frederick, at Beatrice, at Julian. He saw their complete, unshakable confidence in their own judgment. They were blind. They were judging a man's entire structure by looking at a temporary scaffold, utterly oblivious to the skyscraper being built behind it. He met Frederick's gaze and gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "Thank you for the advice, Frederick. I'll certainly take it under consideration." This placid response further cemented their opinion of him. He was weak, pliable, defeated. As the dinner concluded with strained pleasantries, Arthur knew a line had been crossed. This was no longer just family disapproval. It was a campaign, and he understood that, in a war, one must gather intelligence, secure one's position, and wait for the perfect moment to counterattack. As they drove home, Clara finally broke the silence. "Why didn't you say something? Tell them about your plans. You let them walk all over you." "Would they have listened?" Arthur asked quietly, his eyes on the road. "Or would they have simply found a new way to pick it apart, to tell me it was destined to fail?" Clara had no answer. Her silence was his answer. The divide between them, a hairline crack at their wedding, had just widened into a chasm. He was alone in this. He knew it now, and he would have to act accordingly. The campaign of humiliation escalated over the next 2 years. It was a slow, grinding erosion of dignity, executed with the casual cruelty of the truly arrogant. At family gatherings, Arthur's career was a forbidden topic, referred to only in hushed, pitying tones, or with Julian's snide jokes about starving artists. Frederick would hold court about his latest real estate conquest, often pausing to give Arthur a look that said, "This is what a real man does." They offered him a job, a low-level administrative position at Sterling Holdings, a gesture of charity so insulting it was breathtaking. Arthur declined politely, which they took as further proof of his foolish pride. When Arthur and Clara had to downsize from their condo to a smaller, more affordable apartment to pour more capital into his burgeoning firm, a strategic move he made willingly, Beatrice sent over a team of her own interior designers to make the place livable, an act of supposed kindness that was, in reality, a declaration that his own taste and means were inadequate. Clara, caught in the middle, grew increasingly withdrawn. She loved Arthur, but she was addicted to the comfort and security her family provided. She didn't see their actions as a malicious attack, but as a misguided, heavy-handed form of concern. She became the silent enabler, begging Arthur to just play along, to apologize when he'd done nothing wrong, to swallow his pride for the sake of peace, a peace that came at the cost of his self-respect. The culmination of this psychological warfare came 6 months before the gala. Arthur was summoned, via a terse email from Beatrice, to a meeting at the Sterling mansion. The subject line read, "Urgent family matter." When he arrived, he was shown not to the familiar drawing room, but to Frederick's imposing wood-paneled study. Frederick was there, as were Beatrice and Julian. But there was a fourth person present, a man in a severe gray suit with a worn leather briefcase. "Arthur, this is Mr. Harrison, our family's legal counsel," Frederick said, without any preamble. Mr. Harrison gave Arthur a brief, uncomfortable nod. He looked like a man who would rather be anywhere else. His eyes darted around the room, avoiding direct contact. Beatrice took the lead. She held a sheaf of papers, bound in a neat, professional-looking cover. "Arthur, we have been patient. We have offered advice, support, even employment, all of which you have rejected." Her voice was cold, devoid of any warmth. "Your continued instability is a source of great stress for Clara and a significant embarrassment to this family. Therefore, we have decided that some formal guidelines are necessary to manage the situation." She slid the document across the massive mahogany desk. The cover page read, "Family Code of Conduct Agreement." Arthur picked it up. It was, for all intents and purposes, a behavior contract. His heart rate remained steady, but a glacial calm settled over him. He had anticipated something like this. He had seen the trajectory. He opened the document. His eyes scanned the clauses, each one a carefully crafted humiliation. Clause 1. The signee, Arthur Vance, agrees to refrain from discussing his personal business ventures or career aspirations at any Sterling family function, as these topics have been deemed a source of social and familial discord. Clause 2. In any discussion pertaining to business, finance, or real estate, the signee agrees to defer to the superior knowledge and experience of Frederick Sterling. Clause 3. All major financial decisions for the household of Arthur and Clara Vance, exceeding a value of $1,000, shall require the co-signature of Clara Vance, with monthly financial statements to be made available to Frederick Sterling for review. To ensure Clara's financial security, Clause 4, the signee agrees to attend a minimum of 6 sessions with a career counselor, Dr. Alistair Finch, no relation to his former firm, to be selected and paid for by Frederick Sterling. Clause 5, failure to adhere to these terms will be considered a material breach of family trust, resulting in a formal reevaluation of Clara Sterling Vance's familial support structures. It was a masterpiece of psychological cruelty, a legalistic cage designed to strip him of his autonomy, his voice, and his manhood. The final clause was the true threat: fall in line, or they would cut Clara off, forcing a crisis in his marriage and finances that they were certain he could not withstand. He looked up from the document. All 3 Sterlings were watching him, their faces a mixture of grim satisfaction and righteous certainty. They believed they were doing the right thing, protecting their own. Then he looked at Mr. Harrison. The lawyer's face was pale. He was a professional, witnessing a gross misuse of his craft for a personal vendetta. A flicker of something, pity, professional disgust, crossed his face before he looked down at his briefcase. "You want me to sign this," Arthur stated. It wasn't a question. "It's for the best, Arthur," Beatrice said smoothly. "It provides clarity. It sets boundaries." "It's for Clara," Frederick added, his voice like granite, "so she doesn't have to bear the burden of your poor choices alone." Arthur's gaze shifted to the doorway. Clara was standing there. She must have been called down. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed. She'd clearly been briefed. She knew what the document was. He waited for her to speak, to rush to his side, to tell her family this was monstrous. He waited for her to be his wife. She just stood there, twisting her hands, her expression pleading. "Just sign it, Arthur. Please, don't make a scene. We can talk about it later." Her silence was his answer, again, more profound, more final this time. In that moment, something within him shifted. The part of him that had been hoping for her to be his partner in this fight finally went quiet. He was utterly, completely on his own, and if he was on his own, he would act accordingly. He reached into his jacket. "I seem to have forgotten my pen." Before anyone could offer one, he took out his phone and placed it face down on the corner of the desk, its microphone now perfectly positioned. A small, almost imperceptible action. "Mr. Harrison," Arthur said, his voice calm and clear for the recording. "As a legal professional, do you advise me to sign this document, which stipulates financial oversight from a third party and restricts my personal speech?" Mr. Harrison flinched. He was now on the spot. My role here is simply as the drafter of the document at my client's request. I cannot offer you legal advice, Mr. Vance. You should consult your own counsel." "Of course," Arthur said smoothly. "Frederick, you are my father-in-law. You're asking me, your son-in-law, to sign a contract that effectively makes me a ward of your family. Is that a fair summary?" "It's a summary for a man who enjoys melodrama," Frederick sneered. "It's a simple agreement to ensure my daughter's well-being. And you, Beatrice," Arthur continued, turning to her. "This was your idea, wasn't it? This framework?" "It's a framework for stability," she replied, her chin held high. Arthur looked back at the document. He picked up the expensive fountain pen Frederick now pushed across the desk. He uncapped it. He read each clause one more time, slowly, deliberately. Then, with a steady hand, he signed his name on the final page. He pushed the document back to the center of the desk. A collective sigh of relief seemed to pass through the Sterlings. They had won. They had finally broken him. Julian smirked openly. Frederick nodded, a grim victor. "Thank you, Arthur," Beatrice said, a thin, triumphant smile on her lips. "This is the first sensible decision you've made in a year." Arthur stood up. He picked up his phone. "I'll need a copy for my records," he said, his tone matter-of-fact. Frederick waved a dismissive hand. "Harrison will have his assistant send one over." "Thank you," Arthur said. He turned and walked out of the study, past his wife, who stood frozen in the hallway, a tear finally tracing a path down her cheek. He didn't say a word to her. As he walked down the long marble-floored corridor, he felt no shame, no humiliation. He felt only a profound, chilling clarity. The contract was not his cage. It was their trap. and they had just proudly handed him the key. The next day, he took the original copy sent by Harrison's office, along with a high-resolution scan, to a notary public. He also had the audio file from his phone transcribed and notarized. He placed these documents in a simple, elegant leather portfolio. This portfolio became his constant companion, a physical reminder of the debt that was owed. Not a financial debt, but a moral one, and Arthur Vance always paid his debts. The 6 months that followed the signing of the contract were a study in contrasts, a perfectly executed parallel narrative of hubris and strategy. For the Sterlings, it was a period of supreme confidence. With Arthur officially neutered, a compliant signatory to his own diminishment, they turned their full, formidable attention to the prize they considered their birthright, the Meridian Tower. Frederick was obsessed. The tower wasn't just a building. It was to be the crowning achievement of his legacy, a monument of glass and steel that would forever etch the Sterling name into the city's skyline. Sterling Holdings poured immense resources into the bid. They hired a team of celebrity architects, flashy, expensive, and utterly conventional, to design a towering, soulless skyscraper that prioritized profit per square foot above all else. Frederick leveraged his political connections, hosting lavish dinners for city council members and making generous, well-timed donations to civic projects. Julian, puffed up with unearned authority, was put in charge of competitive analysis, which in his hands meant a smear campaign. He dug for dirt on the other bidding firms, leaking anonymous tips to friendly journalists about supposed budget overruns or safety violations on their past projects. He'd report back to his father at their nightly dinners with gleeful satisfaction. "The consortium from Chicago is pulling back," he'd announce. "Heard they're facing an audit. Funny how that happens." Frederick would nod, pleased. This is how the game is played. It's not for the faint of heart. During these dinners, Arthur would sit in his contractually obligated silence. He'd listen to them boast about their cutthroat tactics, their certainty of victory. They barely looked at him anymore. He was a piece of furniture, a silent witness to their arrogance. They had no idea he was the most dangerous man in the room. Meanwhile, Arthur's world was a universe away from the Sterling mansion's stifling opulence. His freelance work had coalesced into the Vance Design Group, VDG, a boutique firm housed in a converted warehouse in the city's revitalized industrial district. The space was a reflection of his philosophy: clean lines, natural light, sustainable materials, and an open-plan layout that fostered collaboration. His team was small, brilliant, and fiercely loyal. They were the architects and engineers who, like him, had grown disillusioned with the corporate grind and were drawn to his vision of creating meaningful spaces. And their primary focus was a project of immense scale and secrecy, their own bid for the Meridian Tower. To avoid the Sterling's notice, Arthur had formed a special purpose entity, a consortium with 2 respected engineering and environmental firms. He named it the Ethelred Consortium, a deliberately obscure, academic-sounding name designed to fly under the radar. Ethelred, noble counsel, a private joke that only he understood. While Frederick's team designed a monument to wealth, Arthur's team designed a landmark for people. Their vision for the Meridian Tower was revolutionary. It was a mixed-use building that integrated public parks into its vertical structure, with a state-of-the-art water recycling system, a facade of photovoltaic glass, and a ground floor designed not as an exclusive lobby, but as a bustling public atrium and marketplace. It was ambitious, sustainable, and deeply connected to the urban fabric. It was, in every way, the antithesis of the Sterling proposal. Arthur worked relentlessly, fueled by a quiet, burning intensity. Late at night, sitting at his drafting table, with the city lights twinkling outside his office window, he would sometimes take out the leather portfolio. He'd open it and look at the Family Code of Conduct Agreement. He never read it with anger anymore. He read it like a general studying a map of enemy territory. Each clause was a reminder of their blindness. Clause 1. Refrain from discussing his business ventures. He had honored it perfectly. They had no idea his venture was in direct competition with theirs. Clause 2. Defer to the superior knowledge of Frederick Sterling. He had nodded and listened while Frederick unknowingly revealed his entire strategy, his weaknesses, his over-leveraged financial positions. Clause 3, Seed Financial Oversight. They thought he was managing a small apartment budget. He was actually managing a multi-million-dollar firm and preparing a multi-billion-dollar project bid. His greatest advantage was the head of the City Planning Commission, Councilwoman Evelyn Reed. Julian's background checks had found nothing on her. She was a career public servant, incorruptible and widely respected. What they didn't know, and couldn't have known, was that her first job out of college had been as a research assistant for Arthur's father, the university professor. She revered the man and had followed Arthur's career with quiet interest. When the Ethelred Consortium's proposal came across her desk, she recognized the intellectual and ethical DNA of the Vance family. She saw a design rooted in integrity, not ego. She scheduled a private, off-the-record meeting with the consortium's principal. When Arthur walked in, she smiled. "I had a feeling it was you, Arthur. Your father would be so proud." They spoke for 2 hours, not about budgets or timelines, but about philosophy, community, and legacy, a real legacy. As the date of the Sterling Gala approached, the day the commission's decision was to be announced, the atmosphere in the two camps diverged completely. At Sterling Holdings, it was triumphant. Frederick had received a call from a junior councilman, a man in his debt, who hinted that the decision was a slam dunk for Sterling. Champagne was ordered. A victory speech was drafted. At Vance Design Group, the mood was one of quiet confidence. There was no celebration yet. There was only focus on the final presentation, on the integrity of their work. The night before the gala, Arthur stood with his team in their office, looking at the final digital rendering of their tower, glowing on a large screen. It was beautiful, elegant, and humane. "Whatever happens tomorrow," he told them, "be proud of what we built. We did it the right way." He went home late to the small apartment he still shared with Clara. She was asleep. He stood in the doorway of their bedroom for a moment, watching her. Their relationship had become a thing of careful silences and unspoken distances. He knew the coming storm would either shatter them completely or force them to finally rebuild. He had made his choice. Soon she would have to make hers. He went to his closet and looked at the tuxedo hanging there. He had bought it, not rented it. Beside it hung the simple leather portfolio, waiting. The Grand Astoria Ballroom was a symphony of excess. 1,000 of the city's most powerful figures drifted through the cavernous space, their laughter echoing off the gilded ceilings. It was the apotheosis of the Sterling universe, and Frederick and Beatrice were its twin sons, radiating smug satisfaction. Arthur and Clara arrived to a polite but cool reception. Beatrice appraised Clara's gown with a critical eye, then glanced at Arthur's tuxedo. "A rental, I presume, Arthur? It's a decent one, at least." "I own it, actually," Arthur replied, his voice neutral. Beatrice just smiled, a tight, knowing smile, as if he'd told a charming lie. Julian appeared, a glass of champagne in hand, his face flushed with excitement. "Evening, you two. Big night. Dad's about to change the city's skyline forever. Try to look happy for him, Arthur. Might be good for your career counseling." He winked and sauntered off into the crowd. Clara flinched at the barb. "Let's just get a drink and find a quiet corner," she whispered, tugging at his arm. She looked beautiful but fragile, like a porcelain doll on the verge of cracking. "In a moment," Arthur said, his gaze sweeping the room. "I see someone I need to greet." He had spotted Councilwoman Evelyn Reed standing near the stage, speaking with the mayor. The Sterlings, in their arrogance, had barely paid her any mind all evening, assuming her vote was a foregone conclusion, secured by their back-channel maneuvering. Arthur gently detached himself from Clara and walked towards the stage. He saw Frederick intercept him, placing a heavy hand on his shoulder. "Not now, Arthur. The adults are talking. Go get your wife a drink." The dismissal was so public, so casual, it drew a few nearby glances. Arthur simply looked at Frederick's hand on his shoulder until the older man, feeling the silent rebuke, awkwardly removed it. "Of course, Frederick," Arthur said, his voice perfectly level. He then continued his path. As he approached, Evelyn Reed's face broke into a warm, genuine smile. "Arthur," she said, her voice carrying just enough to be heard by the mayor. "So glad you could make it." The mayor looked at Arthur with new interest. "Arthur Vance, Evelyn has told me so much about your group's incredible proposal. A real breath of fresh air." Arthur shook the mayor's hand. "Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We believe it's what the city deserves. From across the room, Arthur could feel Frederick's eyes on him. He saw the flicker of confusion, then annoyance on his father-in-law's face, a small anomaly he couldn't immediately categorize or dismiss. It was the first tremor, the first sign that the ground beneath his feet was not as solid as he believed. Arthur exchanged a few more pleasantries, then retreated back to Clara's side, his expression unreadable. "Who was that?" she asked, a note of anxiety in her voice. "Just some people who appreciate my work," he answered softly. The lights in the ballroom dimmed. A spotlight hit the stage. The master of ceremonies, a local news anchor, stepped up to the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen, it is my great honor to introduce a man whose vision has shaped so much of our great city, the chairman and CEO of Sterling Holdings, Mr. Frederick Sterling." A wave of thunderous applause swept the room. Frederick strode to the stage, beaming, waving to the crowd like a conquering hero. He soaked in the adoration, his chest swelling with pride. He tapped the microphone, and a hush fell over the audience. Thank you," he began, his voice booming with confidence. "Tonight, we celebrate not just charity, but progress, vision, the future. For years, Sterling Holdings has been a proud partner in this city's growth, and tonight, we stand on the precipice of our greatest chapter yet." He spoke for 10 minutes, a long, self-congratulatory speech about legacy, family, and the Sterling way of doing business. He spoke of the Meridian Tower as if it were already his, a foregone conclusion. Arthur stood perfectly still, watching him. This was the quiet before the storm. He could feel the tension in the air, the collective, held breath of the audience. He glanced at Clara. She was watching her father with a mixture of pride and apprehension. She still had no idea. In just a few moments, Frederick continued, his voice rising to a crescendo, "We will receive the official announcement from the City Planning Commission, but I can tell you with great confidence that the future of downtown is Sterling." He gave Arthur a final pointed look across the room, a look of ultimate triumph and dismissal. "This," the look said, "is power. This is what you will never be." The MC returned to the podium. "And now, for the moment we've all been waiting for, to make the official announcement, please welcome the respected and tireless head of the City Planning Commission, Councilwoman Evelyn Reed." Evelyn walked to the stage, her demeanor calm and professional. Frederick remained on stage beside her, a magnanimous smile fixed on his face, ready to accept the honor. He even reached out to shake her hand preemptively. Evelyn smiled politely and turned to the microphone. "Thank you, Frederick, and thank you to Sterling Holdings for their ambitious bid. The commission was very impressed with the scale of your vision." Frederick beamed, nodding at the audience. This was it. "However," Evelyn continued, her voice clear and firm, "a city's skyline is not just a symbol of corporate power, but a reflection of its soul. It should represent our highest aspirations for community, sustainability, and human-centric design." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "After extensive review and deliberation, the Commission has voted unanimously to award the Meridian Tower project to a firm whose vision truly embodies that future." Frederick's smile tightened slightly. A flicker of uncertainty crossed his eyes. "We are thrilled to announce," Evelyn declared, "that the contract for the Meridian Tower is awarded to the Ethelred Consortium." Silence. A profound, deafening silence fell over the ballroom. The name meant nothing to most people there. It was an alien term in a room that only spoke the language of Sterling. Frederick's face, which had been a mask of triumph, froze. The smile became a grotesque rictus. His eyes darted from Evelyn to the audience, searching for an explanation. This was not part of the script. "Who?" he sputtered, the word a harsh whisper picked up by the microphone. "What consortium? That's impossible. There must be a mistake." Evelyn Reed looked at him, not with pity, but with a cool, professional finality. "There is no mistake, Frederick." She then smiled warmly at the audience. "The principal architect and founder of the Ethelred Consortium is a man of incredible talent and integrity, and he is actually here with us tonight." She scanned the crowd. "Please join me in congratulating the visionary behind the new Meridian Tower, Mr. Arthur Vance." A single, powerful spotlight swung from the stage, cut through the darkness of the ballroom, and landed squarely on Arthur. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. Every head in the room turned. The collective gasp was audible. Julian Sterling's jaw hung open, a droplet of champagne spilling unnoticed from his glass. Beatrice, standing near the front, swayed on her feet, her hand flying to her chest as if to keep her heart from bursting. And Clara stared at her husband, her eyes wide, with a dawning, shattering comprehension. The quiet, diminished man she had been protecting, pitying, and placating was gone. In his place stood a stranger, bathed in a circle of brilliant light, the center of this new, impossible universe. Arthur met her gaze for a fraction of a second, his expression unreadable. Then, with a composure that was almost unnerving, he began to walk towards the stage. The silence broke into a flurry of confused, excited murmurs. Who was he? The son-in-law? The failed architect? The whispers rippled through the crowd as he moved with a calm, deliberate pace, a man not seizing power, but simply claiming what was already his. He walked past the table where Julian stood, paralyzed. He walked past Beatrice, who looked at him with horrified disbelief. He ascended the small set of stairs to the stage and stood beside Evelyn Reed, facing his father-in-law. Frederick Sterling looked like he had been struck by lightning. His face was pale, his bravado utterly stripped away, leaving only raw, sputtering shock. "You?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. "You?" Arthur didn't answer him. Not yet. He turned to Evelyn and shook her hand warmly. "Thank you, Councilwoman. On behalf of my entire team at Advanced Design Group, we are honored. We promise to build a tower this city can be proud of." Advanced Design Group, he said the name. His name. The name they had mocked and dismissed. The murmuring in the crowd grew louder as the pieces began to click into place. Evelyn smiled and handed him the symbolic award plaque before tactfully stepping back, leaving the stage to the two men. The spotlight remained on them, trapping them in a circle of intense, dramatic focus. This was no longer a civic announcement. It was a family reckoning, broadcast to the entire city. Arthur turned to face Frederick. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The microphone would carry his every word to the silent, rapt audience. "Frederick," he began, his tone even, almost conversational. "I want to thank you, truly. Over the past 3 years, you have provided me with a unique education." Frederick stared at him, speechless. "You taught me about the kind of man you respect," Arthur continued, his voice calm and measured. "A man of power, of wealth, of influence. You made it very clear that character, integrity, and talent were secondary currencies in your world. I learned my lesson well." He paused, then reached into the inner pocket of his tuxedo. The room seemed to hold its breath. He slowly withdrew the folded document. Not the award. It was the contract. He unfolded it with deliberate care. "You see, you thought my education began tonight, but it truly began 6 months ago, when you and your family had me sign this." He held it up for the light to catch it. The Family Code of Conduct Agreement. A new wave of shock rippled through the audience. This was intimate. This was brutal. "You may not all be able to read it from there," Arthur said, his voice taking on a harder edge, the voice of a prosecutor delivering his closing argument. "So allow me to share some of its more insightful clauses." He looked down at the paper. Clause 1. The signee, Arthur Vance, agrees to refrain from discussing his personal business ventures. He looked up, his eyes locking with Frederick's. "I honored that. I never once mentioned my firm, Vance Design Group, or our work on the Meridian Tower. You were so busy telling me about your success, you never thought to ask about mine," he continued. Clause 2. The signee agrees to defer to the superior knowledge and experience of Frederick Sterling. A mirthless smile touched Arthur's lips. "And I did. I sat at your dinner table in perfect silence while you and Julian outlined your entire bidding strategy. You detailed your financial exposure. You boasted about the shortcuts you were taking. It was the most thorough and unwittingly honest competitive analysis I have ever received. Thank you for that." Beatrice, in the front row, let out a small, strangled cry. Julian looked as if he was going to be physically ill. Arthur's voice grew colder, each word a perfectly placed stone in the foundation of their ruin. "But my favorite clause, the one that I have truly come to appreciate, is Clause 3. He read it aloud, his voice ringing with theatrical clarity. All major financial decisions for the household of Arthur and Clara Vance shall require the co-signature of Clara Vance, with monthly financial statements to be made available to Frederick Sterling for review. He let the words hang in the air. You wanted to review my finances to ensure I could afford my rent. You were so focused on the pennies in my personal account that you never thought to look at the bigger picture. He folded the contract slowly, deliberately. You see, Frederick, while you were monitoring my grocery budget, my firm, VDG, was securing its third round of private equity funding. While you were laughing about my doodles in a notebook, we were acquiring two smaller, innovative tech firms to develop the proprietary photovoltaic glass for our tower design. And last week, while you were celebrating your presumed victory, the holding company that controls VDG finalized one last acquisition. He took a step closer to his father-in-law. The final devastating revelation was coming. He delivered it not with a shout, but with a quiet, chilling finality. We acquired a majority stake in Argent Capital Partners, the primary lender for Sterling Holdings commercial debt, the same debt you leveraged to finance this very bid. Frederick's knees seemed to buckle. He gripped the podium to stay upright. Your bid was contingent on securing this project, Arthur stated, his voice devoid of all emotion. Without it, you are in default. As of 9 a.m. tomorrow morning, Sterling Holdings will be in breach of its loan covenants, and I, Frederick, I am your principal creditor. It was done. The quiet bomb had detonated, and the fallout was absolute. The statement landed. Simple, devastating, final. For a long moment, the only sound in the Grand Astoria ballroom was the frantic, panicked breathing of Frederick Sterling, broadcast over the speakers for all to hear. He stared at Arthur, his face a canvas of utter devastation. The king in his own castle, on his coronation night, had just been checkmated in front of his entire court. The spell broke. The room erupted, not into applause, but into a chaotic cacophony of gasps, frantic whispers, and the scraping of chairs as people stood up, turning to their neighbors, their faces alight with shock and disbelief. The media in the room, smelling blood, surged towards the stage, cameras flashing like strobes in a thunderstorm. Frederick Sterling finally collapsed, not onto the floor, but into himself. His broad shoulders slumped, the life seeming to drain from him, leaving behind a hollow, aging man clutching a podium for support. He looked at Arthur, his eyes pleading, confused. Why? He mouthed, the word lost in the din. Arthur gave him no answer. He had already given his answer. He turned his back on his ruined father-in-law and walked to the edge of the stage. His eyes scanned the chaotic sea of faces until he found her. Clara. She stood frozen amidst the turmoil, a solitary island in a churning sea. The people around her were pointing, whispering, looking from her to the stage and back again. Her face was a mask of shock, betrayal, and a dawning, terrifying awe. Julian, finally jolted from his stupor by a primal instinct to defend his father, tried to rush the stage. "You bastard," he screamed, his voice cracking. "You did this to us." He was intercepted by security before he could get close, his impotent rage only adding to the spectacle of his family's complete unraveling. Arthur ignored him. He ignored all of it. He walked down the steps and through the parting crowd, a path clearing before him as if by an invisible force. He walked directly to his wife. He stopped in front of her. He didn't touch her. He didn't raise his voice. The world around them swirled with chaos, but in the small space between them, there was a profound, ringing silence. "Now you know," he said, his voice so quiet only she could hear it. "This is who I am." He looked at her, his gaze holding no triumph, no anger, only a deep, abiding sadness for what they had lost. "Your family tried to dictate who I was allowed to be. They never bothered to see who I truly am. The question is, who are you, Clara? Away from them, away from their money. The choice of who you want to be is yours." He held her gaze for a beat longer, giving her the space to choose, to speak, to react, but she couldn't. She was paralyzed, trapped between the man her husband had become and the family that had just been decimated by him. Seeing her paralysis, her inability to make that choice in that moment, Arthur gave a small, sad nod. He turned and walked away. He didn't look back. He walked out of the ballroom, leaving behind the ruins of the Stirling dynasty and the shattered pieces of his marriage. The doors of the Grand Astoria swung shut behind him, and he stepped out into the cool, quiet night air, a free man. The aftermath of the gala was a brutal public dissection of a fallen empire. The story was on the front page of every newspaper, the lead story on every news channel. The architect's revenge. Stirling Empire crumbles. Son-in-law's silent coup. The narrative was irresistible. The underestimated, humiliated underdog revealing himself to be a strategic genius who had orchestrated the downfall of the city's most arrogant tycoon. The details of the behavior contract, leaked from a dozen sources who had heard Arthur's speech, became a symbol of the Stirling's hubris. They were not just defeated, they were a laughingstock. Stirling Holdings went into receivership the next day. Just as Arthur had predicted, the stock plummeted to nothing. Frederick, a man who had lived his entire life in the public eye, became a recluse, barricaded inside his mansion, refusing to speak to anyone. The few pictures snapped of him by paparazzi showed a broken, haunted man, aged a decade in a single night. Beatrice suffered a complete social annihilation. The friends who had once flocked to her parties now crossed the street to avoid her. Her world of charity boards and high society luncheons vanished. She was a queen without a kingdom, left with nothing but her cavernous, silent house. Julian was perhaps the most lost of all. Stripped of his title, his expense account, and his father's power, he was revealed to be exactly what he was, a man of no discernible skills or value. He tried to rally, to fight back, making angry calls to lawyers and bankers, only to be met with cold, polite dismissals. The power he had always taken for granted was gone, and he had no idea how to exist without it. Arthur, meanwhile, did not behave like a conqueror. There was no gloating, no victory tour. Vance Design Group issued a single professional press release confirming their acquisition of the Meridian Tower project and their new position as the primary creditor for Stirling Holdings. Then they got to work. Arthur's first move surprised everyone. He didn't liquidate Stirling Holdings and sell it for scrap. That would have been the Stirling way of doing things. Instead, he initiated a forced but fair restructuring. He met with the board and the remaining senior management. Frederick and Julian Stirling's leadership was the disease, he told them in the Stirling boardroom, the same room where Frederick had once held court. But this company, its employees, its history, that is not. We are not here to destroy. We are here to rebuild. He installed a new, respected CEO. He protected the pensions of the hundreds of employees who had done nothing wrong. He sold off the family's vanity assets, the corporate jet, the luxury penthouse apartments, to stabilize the company's finances. He saved the company from itself, transforming it from a family fiefdom into a modern, ethical corporation. It was an act of surgical precision, not brute force. Throughout all this, he lived in the same small apartment. He drove the same modest car. He worked from the same converted warehouse office. He had the power to live like a king, but he chose to live like Arthur Vance. The only unresolved piece was Clara. For a week he heard nothing. He didn't reach out. The choice had to be hers, and it had to be absolute. He knew that if he prompted her, if he made it easy, any reconciliation would be built on a weak foundation, just as their marriage had been. 1 week after the gala, his doorbell rang. He opened the door to find Clara standing there. She wasn't wearing designer clothes or expensive jewelry. She was in simple jeans and a sweater, her hair pulled back. Beside her on the ground was a single small suitcase. Her face was pale and her eyes were puffy from a week of crying, but for the first time in a long time, they were clear. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice quiet but steady. He stepped aside and let her in. The apartment felt small and humble after the grandeur she was used to, but she didn't seem to notice. She looked around at the space, at the stacks of books, the architectural drawings on the coffee table. She was looking at his life, the one he had built without her. "My father, he won't see me," she said. "My mother just cries and blames me. Julian, he called me a traitor." Arthur listened without speaking, giving her the space to say what she needed to say. "For 3 years," she continued, her voice thick with emotion, "I asked you to be smaller, to be quieter, to endure it. I told myself it was for the sake of peace, for our marriage, But it wasn't. It was for me. I was a coward. I was afraid of losing the lifestyle I was born into. I was afraid of their disapproval. Tears began to well in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. When you were on that stage, I was so angry at you. You hid this all from me. You let me believe you were struggling. But then I realized you didn't hide it from me. You tried to show me. You tried to tell me who you were, and I didn't listen. I was too busy listening to them. She finally looked at him, her gaze direct and full of a pain that was now self-aware. I am so sorry, Arthur. Not for what you did to them. They earned that. I am sorry for what I didn't do for you. I'm sorry for my silence. It was the worst kind of betrayal. I broke my vows to you long before you ever broke your silence to them. She took a shaky breath. I left. I packed one bag. I haven't accessed my trust fund. I don't want it. I don't want any of it. I want to find out who I am without the sterling name attached to me. She looked at him, her heart in her eyes, and I hope it's a person who is still worthy of being your wife. Arthur looked at the woman before him. She was no longer the fragile doll from the gala. She was stripped down to her foundations, and for the first time he could see the strong, decent person he had fallen in love with all those years ago. The anger and hurt he had carried for so long began to recede, replaced by a tentative, fragile hope. He stepped forward, and for the first time in months, truly took her into his arms. It wasn't a solution. It wasn't an ending, but it was a beginning, a chance to rebuild on a new foundation of honesty and truth. A year later, the city skyline was changing. The foundation for the Meridian Tower was complete, and its innovative, elegant skeleton was beginning to climb towards the sky. It was a symbol of a new era for the city, a project celebrated for its vision and integrity. Arthur Vance was no longer the architect of revenge. He was simply known as one of the most brilliant and principled architects of his generation. His firm was thriving, taking on projects that mattered. He and Clara were still in the process of rebuilding. It wasn't easy. There were scars, but their new relationship was forged in truth. Clara had found a job, not a high-powered career, but a position with a nonprofit organization that partnered with the Meridian Towers Community Outreach Program. She was helping to develop educational programs for children in the city's underserved neighborhoods. For the first time in her life, she was earning her own salary, finding her own purpose, creating her own value. She was becoming her own person. One evening, they stood on the balcony of their new home. It wasn't a mansion or a penthouse, but a beautiful modern apartment with a wide terrace overlooking the city. It was a home they had chosen together. In the distance, the cranes over the Meridian Tower site were lit up against the twilight sky. "It's going to be beautiful," Clara said softly, leaning her head on his shoulder. "I hope so," Arthur replied. "We're trying to make it more than just a building." He thought back on the whirlwind of the past years, the humiliation, the anger, the silent planning, the final explosive confrontation. He felt a sense of peace. He had not become the monster he fought. He had not used his power to crush, but to reshape. He had held a mirror up to the Sterlings, and the reflection had shattered them. Justice had been served, but it was a sober, thoughtful justice, not a gleeful one. Frederick and Beatrice had sold the mansion and moved to a small, secluded community out of state, living a quiet life of obscurity on the fraction of their fortune that remained. Julian, after several failed attempts to start his own business, had taken a mid-level sales job in another city, finally forced to build a life on his own. Meager merits. They were not destroyed, but they were irrevocably diminished, their power and arrogance stripped away, leaving them with only the stark reality of who they were without the sterling name to protect them. Arthur looked out at the city, at the endless constellation of lights. He had learned that true strength wasn't about the noise you make or the power you display. It was about the foundations you build, the integrity of your design. It was about having the patience to withstand the storm and the wisdom to know that real power isn't the ability to tear things down, but the strength to build something better and more lasting in its place. He had taken their contract of humiliation and used it as the blueprint for his own liberation, and in doing so, had given everyone, including himself, the chance to build again. So, what do you think? Was Arthur's response justified, or did he go too far? The line between justice and revenge can be a thin one. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one, and if you found yourself holding your breath during that final confrontation, do us a favor and hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about the quiet ones who turn out to be the strongest of all. Until next time, remember that your true worth is never determined by someone else's opinion of you. It's determined by your own character, your own integrity, and the strength of your own foundations.